Hey folks, this is Kelani. We know that Battle for Azeroth has had a bit of a weird startup when it comes to story. We spark off another faction conflict, seemingly for very little reason besides Sylvanas wanting her own little bonfire, and we lose access to one of the greatest mazes that ever trumped vanilla players, the Undercity. After that, the two factions sort of went their separate ways, making a few new friends with the fisherfolk of Zandalar and Kul'Tiras, while throwing spears at each other now and again. But from what little tidbits we got at BlizzCon, it looks like this story might get blown wide open in the next few patches. Not only will the Horde and Alliance finally be at each other's throats for real with a new raid in patch 8.1, the Battle of Dazar Lore, but as we continue into the future we'll be exploring what Sylvanas really wants, and how Saurfang will attempt to reclaim some semblance of honour for the Horde, and we'll also check in with Anduin and Jaina to see where the Alliance goes from here. The raid leaves both sides in dire straits, with major casualties for both factions. With Tyrande off doing her own thing, I wonder if Anduin and Jaina will be able to agree on what their next plan of action should be. But let's rewind here a little bit, because there's something you might have missed. Alright, fine, no one missed it, and I would be surprised if anyone at BlizzCon missed it too, because it was all but shouted out when this slide came up. Sylvanas is holding a pretty curious dagger if you look closely. Oof, okay, maybe not that closely, but there, right there. That's Xal'atath. What exactly is Sylvanas doing with the blade of the Black Empire? We'll ignore the part where that particular weapon is stowed safely away in my priest's bank, but if you skipped over Legion or just didn't pay too much attention to the Shadow Priest artifact, Xal'atath is an old god that was trapped inside the blade back in the time of the Black Empire. She was apparently a smaller entity, or just not powerful enough to stand against the other major old gods that we've been slowly dealing with, so N'Zoth, I believe, crammed her into a blade and tossed it aside. I guess the joke's on them because Xal'atath survived all this time, more or less intact, while the other old gods have been going one by one. The blade also has a pretty colourful history of ravaging the land whenever it changes hands. It's a powerful artifact with huge ties to the void. So why has it fallen into Sylvanas' hands? What could she possibly want with an artifact so closely related to the old gods? Well, that would depend on how closely she wants to follow in one of the previous war chief's footsteps. Garrosh cast aside his father's axe Gorehowl in favour of one with a few more eyeballs. In the Siege of Orgrimmar he wields Xal'atath, which also bears a striking resemblance to our lovely Xal'atath. Maybe the dev team just forgot that an item with more or less the same name already existed, or perhaps they did it on purpose. Either way, Garrosh ended up turning to the Void when he hungered for more power to stomp out the rebellion against him. Sylvanas doesn't have an iron grip on the Horde right now. All of her actions are taking a toll on the loyalty of her faction. Saurfang already cut ties with the Horde more or less and will be working to undermine our war chief in the future. That's not really a question of if, that's a question of when. But there's also unrest in the Undercity. Some of the Forsaken aren't happy with the status quo, even if Sylvanas is working tirelessly to ensure her mini-scourge has a future. There are signs of a rebellion once again, so Sylvanas might be preparing to do the same thing, or she might have realised that the Void is a relatively untapped font of power that could help her in a pinch. Either way, she could unleash the power of the blade to ascend to new heights, and we would have another void-corrupted war chief on our hands. But hold on a tick, didn't we more or less destroy our artifacts at the end of Legion, Xal'atath included? Well, kind of. We didn't really destroy them, we just turned them into hunks of junk after siphoning off Sargeras' evil energy, but I guess Xal'atath survived once again to sow chaos and destruction, as she always does. Except we know from data mining some story quests in patch 8.1 that she was weakened greatly by the ordeal. We'll have to delve into some 8.1 spoilers to go any further on this topic, so ye be warned. Part of the story, which I guess leads up to the Crucible of Storms raid, has the player find Xal'atath in this weakened state, and more or less nurse her back to health. Except we might go a bit too far, either lured into it by Xal'atath herself, or we just have no idea what we're doing. But either way, we free Xal'atath of her prison. She even gets a few models from what the patch 8.1 data mining shows us, though some of those models are locked, so we can't view them. That tells me something big is going to happen with Xal'atath and the Crucible of Storms raid, and Blizzard doesn't want us to see the entire picture just yet. But we do have her little Void Elf form, so we'll be seeing Xal'atath here and there after we free her, but that means that the blade is probably empty by the time it lands in Sylvanas' hands. So maybe she isn't using it to tap into the Void, because if the blade drew its power from Xal'atath, and Xal'atath is no longer in the blade, surely the blade has no void powers anymore. What use could the Banshee Queen have for a powerless artifact? Well, that blade did serve as a prison for a major void entity. It trapped an old god for a very, very long time. We don't know how Xal'atath's powers compare to N'Zoth or any of the other old gods, so the blade might have limitations we're not aware of, but still, to trap and keep an old god contained for that long, even a weakened or lesser old god, that must be a very powerful blade. So I guess the better question is, what could Sylvanas want with a blade capable of imprisoning an old god? I can think of a few reasons she might want to keep such a blade nearby, just in case. The most obvious answer seems to be to trap another old god or similar void entity. We're leading up to a battle with N'Zoth, there's almost no question about that at this point. The Azshara Warbringer cinematic introduced us to N'Zoth properly for the first time, and showed us a little glimpse of the deal they made and what they hoped to accomplish. If our final battle for the future of Azeroth is with an old god, surely we would want as many Xal'ataths as possible. Sadly, we can probably only make use of the one real blade that once housed Xal'atath, but this could be Sylvanas' ace in the hole, our trump card for a fight with seemingly terrible odds for us. We might have fought off a few old gods already, but I feel like this time we're walking into something of a trap. If we can't destroy N'Zoth or defeat it entirely, perhaps we can use the Black Blade to imprison N'Zoth's essence or conscious, or whatever old gods have that make them tick. That way we only have to weaken it before, bam, whip out that blade which they obviously didn't see coming and suck up that bad boy like he's a ghost in Ghostbusters. It's definitely one use for the empty blade, so it could be there just as a backup plan, just in case things go south. The same plan could be used for any other rogue void entity that tries to make a move on Sylvanas. We know that something whispered into Vol'jin's ear as he died. Pick the undead who will burn this world to the ground. She's the perfect choice for the next war chief. Do it. Do it. And he did. Vol'jin said the Loa spoke to him, but which Loa would want Sylvanas at the head of the Horde? This is actually something we also explore in patch 8.1. We reach out to Ea to ask if she was the one who spoke to Vol'jin. We also check in with our good friend Bolvar to see if he's up to the typical Lich King whispers and corruption nonsense, and we even have a word with Bwonsamdi to make sure he didn't orchestrate this entire plot. No one seems to know what happened, or at least no one is admitting to it, so we're still not sure who would want Sylvanas in a position of power, and maybe Sylvanas is a little bit wary of that exact fact. If someone related to the Void is trying to pull her strings and play her along as a pretty little puppet, well, having a dagger that can imprison Void entities sounds like a really good thing to keep under your pillow at night. If N'Zoth or one of its underlings has been trying to play with her destiny, and she finds out, that dagger might not stay empty for very long. But there is another potential target for this blade, someone who has offered up a great portion of herself to the Void, Alleria. Now this could either be part of a plot to actively go after Alleria, or maybe just something to hold in her back pocket just in case Alleria tries something funny. Alleria did throw a pretty large spanner in the works at the battle for Lordaeron. The Horde seemed to have the upper hand, outnumbering the Alliance in close quarters, with the Alliance faltering. And then Alleria pops out of nowhere with a bunch of crazy, overpowered mechs and sweeps through the battlefield. Maybe Sylvanas is holding a grudge for that little move, or maybe she just wants to finish what she already planned to do. We know Sylvanas planned to assassinate her sisters during their little outing together, but maybe keeping her void-ridden sister as a little pet in a prison blade is more appealing. Then she could try to siphon off some of that delicious void energy from time to time. We know the Void has absolutely no love for Sylvanas as well. During the same comic, the Void is very insistent that Alleria destroy Sylvanas right there and then. She's too dangerous, too much of a threat. Destroy her, kill her. These two sisters could clash sometime in the future, and Sylvanas might be holding the key to victory. All of this is assuming that the blade can only hold a void entity. One of its limits are a little broader. It might actually be able to imprison all manner of creatures, providing the wielder is capable of tapping into the blade's power at all. It can be used on a variety of foes we have yet to face, including the end boss of the next raid tier. We'll be facing off against Azshara when we finally get to Nazjatar, but Azshara is still a being of incredible power. And now she's in league with an old god. I hope we actually have a plan when we go knocking on her door, because just waltzing in unannounced might not end up all too well for us, and if we end up taking down Azshara without anything interesting or cool happening, that would also be incredibly disappointing. Maybe that's where this blade comes into play, either take away Azshara's void powers or imprison her altogether. It's definitely a possibility. But if the blade can hold something other than an old god, What about Sylvanas herself? Her major driving force, her reason to exist right now is to avoid death at all costs. She thought she was done when we toppled Icecrown Citadel and stopped the Lich King. She had her vengeance, she was ready to rest. Except there is no rest in the afterlife for Sylvanas, only torment and pain. She doesn't want to die again, and made a deal with the Valkyr to try and ensure she will never have to languish in the Shadowlands ever again. But she has died since Icecrown, and each time she loses more of her Valkyr. She actually loses another one in patch 8.1 when the Thanos faces off against Malfurion and Tyrande. She might only have one resurrection left, and that would leave her without any Valkyr at all. If she loses any more, she could be knocking on death's door. When faced between an eternity of pain and anguish, and residing in a blade prison until she can be empowered enough to return, I think she would choose the blade. This could be another stopgap for her in the journey to everlasting life, or undeath, or whatever you want to call it. A trump card all for herself, just in case the worst comes to pass. Either way, Sylvanas holding the Blade of the Black Empire holds so many possibilities. I expect her to break ties with the Horde in one form or another before this expansion is over, and I'm really interested to see what happens, especially with the new choices we have for story quests going forward. Apparently the dev team really wants to make these choices matter, so we could see a whole new type of story progression for the rest of BFA. I hope it works out. We should find out whether or not she's being controlled, and if she is, by whom. Who is the character behind the curtain? An old foe or something entirely new? There's always the possibility of Sylvanas becoming a raid boss as well. It happened for Garrosh, and right now she seems to be heading down sort of a similar road. And there's an interesting response to a question relating to this discussion from the BlizzCon Q&A. The question was something like, how are you going to differentiate between what Sylvanas is doing right now and what Garrosh did in Mists of Pandaria? The answer was kind of chilling. If I was Sylvanas, I would look at what Garrosh hath wrought and think he was an amateur. Garrosh dropped a mana bomb on Theramore, called for the annihilation of every Alliance race, turned to the Void for power and tossed the Heart of Usage into the pool in the Vale of Eternal Blossoms, corrupting the entire zone. He also went back in time and did the whole Iron Horde thing, but I'm not sure that counts towards his adventures as Warchief. If that's what an amateur managed to achieve, what in the heck is Sylvanas planning? I'm not sure I want to know, but there might be another clue leading to our beloved Warchief becoming a raid boss. The 3 Warbringer shorts were about Jaina, Azshara, and Sylvanas. Jaina is the last boss of the next raid. Whether you're Alliance or Horde, you're going to see the Jaina fight last. It can also drop a cool water elemental mount, so that's something to look forward to. From what we understand, Azshara will be the end boss of the raid tier after that. That leaves 1 Warbringer who's left out of the party. If Sylvanas really does become the last boss of a raid tier, that would make 3 for 3. And I don't know if this was a bit of a joke, but when Metzen came up and asked about the return of Thrall, he was told the seat of Warchief might actually be vacant by the time this expansion is over. So I would keep a close eye on Sylvanas in these next few patches, and maybe think long and hard about whether you want to follow her into the darkness, or walk the path of a traitor to try and redeem the Horde with Saurfang. What do you think Sylvanas plans to do with Xal'atath's prison? Will it be for selfish reasons entirely, or is she just doing what needs to be done to win the war in the end? Leave all your thoughts in the comments section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon. You can see their names floating by on screen. If you want to join these lovely guys and gals, you can find a link in the description below. Remember to leave a like just below the video before you leave, and if you want to see more, make sure to subscribe. But apart from that, thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.